The kid behind the counter picked up one boot by the pull strap, turned it over, looked at the sole, and set it back down beside the other one. "Yeah, old cowboy boots. Worn out. Soles are shot. We get these. I can do $25 for the pair." Cecil Weaver stood on the other side of the counter. 81 years old, the sweat-stained cream resistal that had been his Sunday hat for 40 years set back on his head, the pair of old brown cowboy boots sitting side by side on the glass between them, and watched a 23-year-old in a panhandle pawn polo look at the boots his father had worn every day of his adult life and see $25 worth of worn-out leather. "Those were my daddy's," Cecil said, quiet. The kid, Landon by the crooked name tag, shrugged and pushed one boot an inch across the glass with his index finger. "Sure, 25 for the pair, final." Here's what that kid in the pawn shop didn't know. Here's what nobody in that shop knew. The old brown cowboy boots Cecil Weaver had just set down on that counter were worth $47,000. They were not factory boots. They were not catalog boots. They were not anything that had ever come off a production line. They were hand-lasted, hand-stitched, hand-finished cowboy boots made by a single man, one pair at a time, in a small shop on South Congress Avenue in Austin, Texas, in 1967. The maker's stamp, barely visible now, pressed into the leather inside the right pull strap in small block letters, read, "C. Dunn, Austin, Tex, Charlie Dunn." Charlie Dunn was born in 1898 in a farmhouse outside of White Oak, Texas, and died in 1993 at the age of 95. In between, he made cowboy boots by hand for 75 years. He made boots for governors, senators, oil barons, rodeo champions, and ranchers who saved for a year to afford a pair. He made boots for Lyndon Johnson. He made boots for Jerry Jeff Walker, who wrote a song about him in 1972, a song called Charlie Dunn, that became one of the anthems of the Austin music scene. He made boots for Willie Nelson. He made boots in a small cinder-block shop on South Congress, when South Congress was still a row of pawn shops and beer joints, decades before it became the tourist strip it is today. Every pair of Charlie Dunn boots was made the same way. The customer came to the shop. Charlie measured both feet with a length of string and a pencil and a piece of brown paper, and then Charlie built the boots from scratch, cutting the leather, lasting the uppers over a wooden foot form he carved himself, hand-pegging the soles, hand-stitching the welts, hand-finishing the edges. One pair, one man. No machines except a sewing machine for the shaft stitching. A pair of Charlie Dunn boots took 3 to 6 weeks. He charged $40 in the 1960s. He never raised his prices to match what the market would have paid, because Charlie Dunn did not think of his boots as collectibles. He thought of them as boots. Cecil's father, Hollis Weaver, had driven 300 miles from San Angelo to Austin in 1967 in a 1962 Ford pickup to have Charlie Dunn measure his feet. Hollis had worn the boots home that same week. He had worn them every day for 35 years, ranching, feeding, fencing, driving to town, going to church on Sunday. He had resoled them once in 1983 at a boot shop in San Angelo, but the uppers, the parts Charlie had cut and stitched and lasted, were original. Hollis had died in 2002. The boots had been sitting in a cardboard box on the top shelf of Cecil's bedroom closet for 22 years. The last authenticated pair of 1960s Charlie Dunn boots to surface at auction at Heritage in Dallas in 2021 had sold for $43,000. Cecil's pair, with their 35 years of honest ranch wear and their intact maker's stamp, was about to be appraised at $47,000. This is the story of how Cecil Weaver walked into Panhandle Pawn on a Tuesday morning in November with $620 of trouble in his head and walked out with the discovery that the boots his father had paid $40 for, the boots Hollis had driven 300 miles to have a man named Charlie measure his feet and build by hand, were now worth more than the truck Hollis had driven to Austin in. Before I tell you what happened when the expert walked through that door, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me tell you about Cecil. Cecil Hollis Weaver was born in 1943 in San Angelo, Texas. His father, Hollis Weaver, ran an 800-acre cow-calf operation on the Middle Concho River south of San Angelo for 47 years and died in 2002 at the age of 80. His mother, Ora Lee, taught third grade at Lee Middle School for 29 years and died in 2009. Cecil went to San Angelo Central High, graduated in 1961, did 4 years in the Army, 2 at Fort Bliss, 2 in Germany, came home and spent 37 years at the Goodyear tire plant on Knickerbocker Road until it closed in 2003. Married Wanda Pfluger in 1967. One son, Hollis, named for Cecil's father, now 55 and living in Abilene, working for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice as a corrections officer. Wanda had died in 2022 of a heart attack in the kitchen on a Sunday evening, mid-sentence, the way heart attacks take the people who deserve them least. The truck repair was the problem. The 2001 Dodge Ram had thrown the water pump and the serpentine belt in October. The mechanic at Craven's Auto on Sherwood Way had quoted $620 for the pump, the belt, the tensioner, and the labor. Without the truck, Cecil couldn't get to the VA clinic in Brady or to the HEB or to Southland Baptist, where he'd been a deacon for 28 years. His Goodyear pension was $1,180 a month. Social Security added $2,160. After property taxes on the small stucco house on Prosser Street, insurance, electric, water was expensive in San Angelo, his blood pressure and cholesterol medications and groceries, he had about $90 of slack in a good month. He did not have $620. He could have called Hollis Jr. in Abilene. Hollis Jr. was a corrections officer with good state benefits but a government salary with a wife and 3 kids, the oldest starting at Angelo State in the spring. Cecil had not asked his son for $1 in 18 years. He was not going to start over a water pump. For 10 days, he walked the 1.5 miles to the HEB and caught rides to church with his neighbor, Roy Esquivel. On the 11th morning Tuesday, he went to the bedroom closet. The boots were in a cardboard boot box on the top shelf, behind Wanda's sewing basket and a photo album from the 1990s. The box was a plain brown box. Hollis had never had a proper boot box for them because Charlie Dunn hadn't given out boxes. Charlie had wrapped the boots in brown paper, handed them across the counter, and said, "Wear 'em in good health." Hollis had carried them to the truck in the brown paper and driven 300 miles home. Cecil opened the box. The boots were brown, a rich chocolate that had darkened and mellowed over 57 years of wear and weather. The shafts were 14 inches, the toes were a classic round, and the heels were underslung walking heels, not riding heels. Charlie had asked Hollis what he did, and Hollis had said, "I ranch," and Charlie had said, "Then you need a walking heel, not a saddle heel, because you're on the ground more than you're on a horse." The stitching on the shafts was a simple single-row pattern. No fancy inlay, no colored thread, no flowers or eagles or longhorns. Just clean, straight, tight stitching that had not loosened in 57 years. The leather was thick, heavier than any factory boot Cecil had ever felt, and it had aged the way good leather ages when it has been worn honestly and oiled occasionally, not cracked, not peeling, but grained and darkened and alive. The soles were worn through at the balls of the feet. Hollis had walked a lot, and the heels were worn to an angle on the outside edges, the way every rancher's heels wear, because of the way a man plants his feet on uneven ground. But the uppers were solid. The pull straps were intact. And inside the right pull strap, pressed into the leather in small block letters by a metal stamp Charlie Dunn had used for 50 years, were the words, "C. Dunn, Austin, Tex." Hollis had told Cecil about the boots exactly once, in 1985, sitting on the tailgate of the Ford at a livestock auction in Bollinger. "I drove to Austin to get these made," Hollis had said. "Man named Charlie Dunn on South Congress. He measured my feet with a string and a pencil and a piece of brown paper. He said he'd have them in 3 weeks. I came back in 3 weeks, and he handed them to me in brown paper and said, "Wear 'em in good health. $40. Best $40 I ever spent." Cecil had nodded. He had been 42. He had not thought about it again. Hollis Weaver had been the kind of man who wore one pair of boots until they needed resealing and then wore them again. He had owned 3 pairs of boots in his entire adult life, a pair of Justin Ropers he'd worn out by 1965, the Charlie Dunns from 1967 to 2002, and a pair of Ariats he'd bought when the Dunns finally needed resoling a second time and the boot shop said the soles were too thin to resole again. Hollis had put the Charlie Dunns in the box and bought the Ariats and had died 6 months later wearing the Ariats, which he'd told Cecil were comfortable but didn't fit the same. "Charlie made those boots for my feet," Hollis had said. "These Ariats are made for everybody's feet. It ain't the same thing." Cecil sat at the kitchen table that Tuesday morning with the boot box on the table and the mechanic's estimate beside his coffee mug, and he did something he'd sworn he would never do. He put the box in the truck and drove Roy Esquivel's Silverado to town. Panhandle Pawn sat on Bryant Boulevard between a taco casa and a discount tire. The bell over the door jangled as Cecil stepped inside. Landon was behind the counter on his phone and looked up after about 9 seconds. "Help you?" "I've got a pair of old cowboy boots, my daddy's, handmade." "Let's see 'em." Cecil set the box on the glass and lifted the lid. Landon pulled one boot out by the pull strap, turned it over, looked at the sole. Worn through at the ball, heel ground to an angle. He looked at the upper. He set it back. "Yeah, old boots. Soles are done. We get cowboy boots all the time. Lucchese's, Ariats, sometimes a Tony Lama. These don't have a brand on the outside, I can see. No inlay, no exotic skin. $25 for the pair. They're handmade. My daddy had them custom." "Sure, Pops." Landon picked up the other boot and flexed the sole. The worn leather creased but didn't crack. He shrugged. "Custom don't mean much if I can't sell 'em. Nobody wants somebody else's custom fit. 25. Take 'em or leave 'em." He set the boot back down on the glass without care. It tipped over and the shaft folded against the counter. Cecil's hands were flat on the glass. His jaw was tight. He thought about the truck. He thought about Wanda in the kitchen on that Sunday evening. He thought about Hollis at the livestock auction in Bollinger, pulling his boot off to show Cecil the maker's stamp inside the pull strap. C. Dunn, Austin, Texas. He thought about a man who had driven 300 miles to have another man measure his feet with a string. He did not pick up the boots. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He stood there with both hands flat on the glass and his mouth closed tight, because the only other thing he could do was cry in front of a 23-year-old, and Cecil Weaver had not cried in front of another human being since Wanda's funeral in 2022. The bell over the door jangled again. A man came in. Mid-50s, short, stocky, deeply tanned, with a thick salt and pepper mustache and close-cropped dark hair under a clean gray felt Stetson. He wore a brown leather vest over a white pearl snap western shirt, pressed dark Wranglers with a crease you could cut paper on, and polished black Lucchese classics. He carried a small brown leather portfolio and a rolled-up copy of Western Horseman under his arm. He came 2 steps inside, glanced at the counter, and stopped. He looked at the boots. He tilted his head. He took another step. His eyes went to the shafts, the clean, straight, tight, single-row stitching. His eyes went to the toes, the classic round. His eyes went to the heels, the underslung walking heel. His lips pressed together. Something changed in his face. Not surprise, exactly, but recognition. The recognition of a man who has been looking for something his whole career and is suddenly looking at it. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was quiet and West Texas flat, the kind of voice that doesn't waste a syllable. "Sir, are those handmade boots?" Landon looked up. "Old guy's selling. 25 for the pair." The man did not look at Landon. He looked at Cecil. "Sir, my name is Ray Calderon. I am the curator of the Texas Boot and Leather Collection at the Briscoe Western Art Museum in San Antonio. I also serve on the authentication board for Heritage Auctions Western Americana division. I'm in San Angelo this week because we are acquiring a private collection of spur maker tools from a family in Cristobal. I stopped in here because I always stop at pawn shops in ranch towns. Would you permit me to examine those boots? Cecil found his voice. You're asking me? They're yours, aren't they? They were my daddy's. Then yes, sir. I'm asking you, and I'd ask you, please, to stand that left boot back up on its sole. The shaft shouldn't be folded. It stresses the stitching at the counterline. Landon straightened the boot without being told twice. Something about the way the man in the Stetson had said, please, carried a rancher's authority. Ray Calderon set his portfolio on the counter and opened it. He drew out a pair of thin white cotton handling gloves, a 10x jeweler's loop, a small LED pen light, a soft chamois, and a leather-bound notebook. He pulled the gloves on finger by finger. May I? Cecil nodded. Ray picked the right boot up with both hands, one under the sole, one supporting the shaft, and set it on the chamois. He examined the leather. He ran a gloved fingertip along the shaft stitching, the single-row pattern, tight, unbroken for 57 years. He examined the pull strap. He turned the boot upside down and studied the sole construction, the hand-pegged wooden shank visible through the worn leather. He looked at the heel, the underslung walking heel, built up in stacked leather. Then he folded the right pull strap open and held the LED pen light inside the shaft, illuminating the inner surface of the strap. He read what was stamped there. He set the boot down. He took off his Stetson and set it on the counter. He rubbed the back of his neck with one gloved hand. He picked the boot back up. He read the stamp again. Oh, he said, very quietly. Then, well, I'll be. He looked at Cecil. Mr. Weaver. Cecil Weaver. Mr. Weaver. The stamp inside the right pull strap of this boot reads, C. Dunn, Austin, Tex. He paused. He set the boot on the chamois with a deliberateness that Cecil recognized. Mr. Weaver. Charlie Dunn. Yes, sir. That's the name my daddy said. Charlie Dunn. On South Congress in Austin. Ray Calderon nodded slowly. He took a breath. Mr. Weaver. Charlie Dunn was born in 1898 near White Oak, Texas, and died in 1993 at the age of 95. He is considered, by bootmakers, by collectors, by museum curators, and by anyone who has ever studied the history of American leatherwork, the greatest cowboy bootmaker who ever lived. He was called the Michelangelo of cowboy boots. He made boots by hand for 75 years. Every pair was built from scratch for one customer, measured with a string, lasted on a hand-carved wooden form, hand-pegged, hand-stitched, hand-finished. One man, one pair, 3 to 6 weeks. He paused. Charlie's shop was a small cinder-block building on South Congress Avenue in Austin. He made boots for Lyndon Johnson, for Jerry Jeff Walker, who wrote a song about him, for Willie Nelson, for governors and senators and rodeo champions. But he also made boots for ranchers, for working men who drove hundreds of miles to have Charlie measure their feet because they had heard from another working man that Charlie's boots fit like nothing else on earth. Charlie charged $40 a pair in the 1960s. He never raised his prices the way the market said he should. He believed boots were for wearing, not for collecting. He picked the boot up again and held it in the fluorescent light. The dark chocolate leather caught the light with the depth that only 57 years of honest wear produces. Charlie Dunn boots from the 1960s are among the rarest and most valuable pieces of American Western leatherwork in existence. Charlie did not keep production records. He did not number his boots. The only way to identify a Charlie Dunn boot is the maker's stamp inside the pull strap and the construction details, the hand-pegged sole, the hand-carved last, the stitch pattern, and the leather weight, which is heavier than any factory boot because Charlie cut his own leather from full hides. He looked at Cecil. The last authenticated pair of 1960s Charlie Dunn boots in ranch-worn condition sold at Heritage in Dallas in 2021 for $43,000. This pair, with the intact maker's stamp, the original uppers, the honest 35-year ranch patina, and the walking heel construction that tells me Charlie asked your father what he did for a living before he built the boots. At professional appraisal through Heritage Auctions' Western Americana division, with authentication from the Briscoe Western Art Museum, would be valued between $40,000 and $55,000. Conservative estimate, $47,000. Landon's phone was face down. His hands were in his pockets. His mouth was open. I was going to say 50. I meant 50. Cecil didn't look at him. He was looking at the boots on the chamois and thinking about Hollis. He was thinking about a man who had driven 300 miles in a 1962 Ford to have a 90-year-old bootmaker measure his feet with a string and a pencil and a piece of brown paper. He was thinking about the 300 miles home with the boots wrapped in brown paper on the bench seat, and the first morning Hollis had pulled them on, and the 35 years of mornings after that, feeding, fencing, driving to the sale barn, walking the ground his father had walked before him and his grandfather before that. Charlie had made those boots for Hollis's feet, not for everybody's feet, for Hollis's. 2 feet, measured with a string, in a cinder block shop on South Congress Avenue in 1967. Wear 'em in good health, Charlie had said, and Hollis had, for 35 years. Ray Calderon handed Cecil his card. Mr. Weaver, take your time. Talk to your son. But please, sir, do not leave these boots in this shop. And please, stand them upright, soles flat on a shelf, shafts straight, in a cool, dry place. No box. Let the leather breathe. Cecil nodded. He watched Ray set both boots upright on the chamois, side by side, the way boots should stand. Soles flat, shafts straight, facing forward. He wrapped each boot in a soft cotton cloth from his portfolio. He handed them to Cecil, one at a time. Cecil took them. He held one in each hand at his sides, the way a man carries boots, by the pull straps, one in each hand. He nodded once at Ray Calderon. He walked out past Landon without a word. In the parking lot, sitting in Roy's Silverado with the November sun warm through the windshield, Cecil Weaver set the boots on the bench seat beside him and put his hand on the worn brown leather and cried for the first time since Wanda's funeral. He called Hollis Jr. that night. Hollis Jr. drove down from Abilene the next morning. They sat at the kitchen table on Preußer Street with the boots standing between them, upright, soles flat, shafts straight, the way Ray Calderon had set them. Hollis Jr., who had been named for a grandfather whose boots he had seen beside the back door every evening of his childhood, reached inside the right pull strap and ran his finger across the maker's stamp. C. Dunn, Austin, Tex. Grandpa drove to Austin for these, Hollis Jr. said. 300 miles, Cecil said, for a pair of boots. For the right pair of boots. They called Ray Calderon at 9. Heritage Auctions authenticated the boots in their Dallas offices in December. The maker's stamp was confirmed through comparison with 4 other documented Charlie Dunn stamps from the same era. The hand-pegged sole construction was confirmed. The leather weight was measured at 7 ounces, consistent with Charlie's documented preference for full-weight harness leather. The stitch pattern matched 3 other known 1960s Dunn pairs in the Briscoe collection. The walking heel was documented as evidence that Charlie had custom-fitted the boots for a working rancher, which increased the provenance value. Authentication was unanimous. Heritage listed the boots in their January Western Americana sale. Bidding opened at $22,000. It closed at $44,000. After commission, the Weaver family received $38,000. Cecil paid for the truck. He paid the property taxes 3 years forward. He had the stucco on the house patched where it had been cracking above the bedroom window since 2018. He sent Hollis Jr. $15,000 and told him to use it for the girls' tuition and not to argue. He set up a small trust for his 3 grandchildren. He bought Wanda a new headstone. The temporary marker had already started to sink in the Concho Valley caliche, with her full name and a line beneath that read, "Wife, Mother. She kept me standing." He did not sell the boots. After the heritage authentication, Ray Calderon had offered Cecil a choice: sell the boots outright at auction or loan them to the Briscoe Western Art Museum for permanent display. Cecil had chosen the loan. The boots went on display in the Briscoe's Texas Bootmakers Gallery in February, standing upright in a custom case, soles flat, shafts straight, the way a rancher would leave them beside the back door. The placard read, "Charlie Dunn Cowboy Boots, circa 1967, handmade by Charlie Dunn, 1898 to 1993, South Congress Avenue, Austin, Texas. Custom built for Hollis Weaver, 1922 to 2002, of San Angelo, Texas, who drove 300 miles to have Dunn measure his feet. Worn daily for 35 years on an 800-acre cow-calf ranch on the Middle Concho River. On loan from the family of Cecil H. Weaver, San Angelo, Texas. Hollis Jr. drove his father to San Antonio for the dedication. Cecil wore his cream resistal and the dark western suit he'd worn to Wanda's funeral. He stood in front of the case for a long time, looking at the boots. Hollis's boots, Charlie's boots, standing the way Hollis had left them beside the back door for 35 years. $40, Daddy, Cecil said, quiet enough that only Hollis Jr. heard him. Best deal you ever made. A letter came to Cecil's post office box in March. It was from a 73-year-old woman in Austin named Patsy Dunn Garrett, Charlie Dunn's granddaughter. She had seen the heritage listing online. She wrote that her grandfather had made an estimated 4,000 pairs of boots in his 75-year career and that fewer than 200 were documented in collections. She wrote that Charlie had never written anything down, no receipts, no customer logs, no measurements. He had kept every measurement in his head. He had known every customer's feet by memory. Patsy wrote that when Charlie was 90 years old, a man had walked into the shop and said, "Charlie, I need a new pair, same as last time." And Charlie had looked at the man's feet and said, without measuring, "Left foot is a half size wider than the right, same as 20 years ago. Sit down." And he had built the boots from memory. Patsy enclosed a photograph, a Polaroid from 1967, slightly faded, of Charlie Dunn at his workbench on South Congress, holding a boot last in his left hand and a lasting hammer in his right, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, his white hair combed back, a pencil behind his ear. On the workbench beside him, in brown paper waiting for pickup, was a pair of boots with underslung walking heels, Hollis Weaver's boots, waiting for the man who had driven 300 miles to have the right man measure his feet. Cecil had the photograph framed. It hangs beside the empty space on the bedroom closet shelf where the boot box used to be. And the next Saturday morning, back home in San Angelo, Cecil sat down at his usual booth at Fuentes Cafe downtown on South Chadbourne with his two oldest friends, Junior Pfluger and Travis McWhorter, the way he had every Saturday for 23 years. Junior looked at him over the rim of his coffee mug. "Heard you made the Standard Times, Cecil." "Heard that." "Cowboy boots, huh?" "Cowboy boots." Travis shook his head. $25. $25, Cecil agreed. The three of them laughed, the quiet, chest-deep laugh of old men who have lived long enough to know that the world rarely sees what matters, and that sometimes, if you wait long enough, it finally does. A kid in a pawn shop looked at those boots and said, $25. He didn't know. They never do. If stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel, because some things have hidden worth.